and that jives probably with a lot of the other businesses, especially the businesses whose revenue is extremely fluid, like the restaurant industry. If you were, especially those restaurants that if you were a destination place and people enjoyed coming to your place and the takeout portion was only a small percentage, 4 or 5% of your overall business, well, you're going to be hurting gravely right now. If the PPP loans aren't kicking in yet, you're hurting gravely. You're shutting down at this point.
Well, I think most people who have applied for the PPP loans have received them. I haven't heard of anybody who's applied and haven't, but I'd love to hear from somebody who hasn't.
But it's been a bit slower than expected,
yes.
Especially for some of the smaller businesses who were the first ones to feel the pain very quickly. One of the businesses that was my business of the year, I think 6-7 years ago, just received it finally. And we actually were intervening on their behalf and made a few phone calls. So.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Adrin. How are you?
Can't see your face, but.
Well, can you see my photo?
I can see your photo.
Okay, good. Well, my hair looks ridiculous. I just don't look professionally ready for a meeting.
And Fran, it was nice seeing you as well. You didn't see anything, but you popped up, so wonderful seeing you. And Tammy,
hi,
just joined as well. Nice to see everyone. My God, I missed you guys.
I know.
Well, we were already kind of talking. It's 11 o'clock, so there's no reason to wait. We'll just have additional people join us. I want to welcome everybody to our conversation with Assemblymember Adrin Nazarian. A lot of us know Adrin, in the community, but for those of you who don't, the Assemblymember represents a major swath of the San Fernando Valley, including the community of Sherman Oaks and Reseda and Tarzana, and where I live on the southern edge of North Hills. And the Assemblymember is on a number of committees, including, I believe, the Aging Committee. Are you the chair of the Aging Committee still?
Yes.
Excellent. And obviously, we're dealing, Scout's introducing herself. This is Scout, my cat. So, there's a lot to talk about today. We obviously are just dealing with an order that has come down from the governor that is closing businesses that are not, that have indoor dining. That could change in and of itself in the next week or so. I think so many things are in flux, as I was mentioning to you earlier, that it's really hard to plan. It's really hard to plan ahead as a business and know, am I going to be doing something? Is my operation going to be outdoors? Or is my operation going to be primarily pickup? These are the questions that businesses are asking themselves, in addition to the cash flow issues that we were chatting about earlier. So there's nothing really, the floor is yours to really address what you think is most appropriate. I think we're all dealing with the same things right now, certainly in our personal lives, dealing with the stress of separation and social distancing on top of that. But on the professional end, depending on what business you're in, it could either be you could be doing very well in some cases if you're an essential business, or you're heavily struggling and you're trying to decide whether or not to even remain open. And I've talked to many businesses over the last couple of weeks that are seriously considering the question of whether or not it's worth it. if it's worth it to remain open, if it makes sense to provide a service that's costing them no more than they can take in revenue. These are the questions that our members are facing. And we're really happy to have you here with us today to have this conversation. And we welcome you here. By the way, I'm David Phelps, President and CEO of the Sherman Oaks Chamber. Good morning to everybody. And Assemblymember, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, David. And I'm Assemblymember Adrin Nazarian, since we're all officially introducing ourselves. By the way, Carson, I like your backdrop. I had not seen you in a Zoom meeting before, so it's nice to see all those records. Thank you for the invitation, by the way. I appreciate joining you. I'm always welcome to have these conversations. I think it's important when there's good communication. I've always believed firmly in that communication resolves 80% of the problems. If there isn't communication, there are feelings of hostility that develop because people are left without really knowing what's going on, or there's a sense of lack of direction as well as lack of input and lack of being heard. And it runs contrary to our not only democracy, but day-to-day awareness of how to move about and get things done. So with that, I mean, a lot of you have heard me talk before. Okay, can you hear me now? Interesting. I didn't mute myself. All right. When I took office about 8 years ago, two things that were extremely important to me were infrastructure and, for a broad-based term, equity-related issues, which has become really popular right now. But there's two things that I was seeing the fate of Los Angeles and California hinge on. One was, if we want to make Los Angeles a sustainable long-term place for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to enjoy living, we need to address a few of the infrastructural issues. Chief among them are water and transportation. If we don't address transportation and make sure that people are getting around comfortably or look at how we're changing the way we conduct our daily activity, which has to go into planning and housing development projects, we're not going to be a sustainable long-term place, and you're going to start seeing people want to move away. Second, among that was, we've been the beneficiary of and for whatever your personal hostilities are with the DWP, a lot of times the DWP gets the wrath of also other organizations associated with it, chiefly among them, unfortunately, its labor union, its members' labor union. But if you just look at the functions of DWP and what it's been able to accomplish over the course of the last 80, 90 years, it's relatively kept our water costs fairly low compared to most other places. There are still some places in California that don't charge for water. A lot of that has been changing, especially over the course of the last 10 years. But the reality is that LA has been at the forefront of negotiating very strong water contracts and has been able to position itself in a position of strength in order to be able to provide water for a very cheap cost and maintain the high levels of cleanliness and usability that we all have come to take for granted for the most part. But in order to continue doing that, receiving that, it's important for us to make sure that we have the oversight necessary and make sure that the future contracts are never jeopardized. Because if we allow the water brokers to get what they want, cost of water, drinkable water, can become so overwhelming that could also lead to mass exodus in Los Angeles. So those were the two regional issues that concerned me a great deal. And then when you look at the broader picture, equity was an issue for me that included education, because your democracy is stronger when you have an educated constituency who knows how to keep accountable its elected officials, but at the same time also knows how to articulate and demand what it is that they need and how we need to get there and work in partnership or in tandem with government. And with that comes also providing opportunities. I mean, as an immigrant myself, the opportunity piece has been a very important component of how I've gotten here. And as I took over the chairmanship of the Assembly Aging Committee and Long-Term Care, aging has become a very important issue for me. Prior to that, I was in Health Committee I've been on Health Committee for all of 8 years that I've been in office. Aging, I just took over about 2 years ago. And working in tandem in two of these committees, first of all, if you look at just where we are in the spectrum of our age in California, right now, 60-year-olds and above make up roughly about 12 to 13% of the population in California. In about less than 15 years, we're anticipated to have that number double up to about 25%. So 1 out of every 4 Californian is going to be 60 years old or older and is going to qualify for retirement and is going to decide whether to move, to stay, or whatever the outcomes are, most likely stay because their families are here. And so as they also get older and health demands become more overwhelming or in time increase, those are associated costs that are just going to exponentially grow in a very short period of time. And we're neither prepared to address those costs, we don't have the workforce to be able to address them. Even if we had the workforce to address them, we're not paying them competitively enough to stay in this industry so that they would not go to technology or other biotech or any other fields who would be higher paying to them. So we don't even know the extent of how much this issue is going to balloon, and there are a lot of issues around elderly care and senior care that still need to be addressed. Chief among them, paying for some sort of long-term care assistance, because what we've also seen is that a lot of people haven't been saving money for their retirement. So that said, this year started out with homelessness still being the issue of major concern and topic. I don't need to say about it. We live it on a daily basis in LA. And we've been working on homelessness for pretty much the entire time that I've been in office. But in the last 3-4 years, you've noticed that there's been a lot more concerted efforts, whether to pass measures or bonds in order to help financing long-term, as well as taking steps to make housing both affordable and market-priced housing projects more affordable and more available and more easily accessible. Then the pandemic hit, and it's caused all types of challenges for us, from whether schools, childcare, work, sole proprietor businesses, and I'm sure I'm going to be getting into questions, so I'll leave it at that. And then, as if those weren't enough, we had massive protests, again, based on equity-related issues, which also led to riots in many cases, which also continued to hurt our business community. As if the pandemic wasn't enough, some of the riots really desecrated some of our businesses. Fortunately, SBA has stepped in, and there's been quite a bit of relief being provided, but I'd like to hear from all of you to see if some of the local businesses have been able to take advantage of that or not. I'm happy to get into the budget and legislative cycles. I just very briefly, our budget basically was modeled on the previous year's budget in order to keep a baseline of costs, operational costs, to keep the activities uncut and services that are being provided uncut. The governor wanted to be a bit more conservative and wanted to roll back and make certain cuts so that July 1st, we would go in with a leaner budget. What the legislature did was actually restore back a lot of the cuts, because we were both the governor and the legislature were operating on the assumptions that we are most likely going to get federal assistance coming in at some point in September or October. And if that money is coming in, the legislative take on the budget was, why cut programs right now and take monies away from certain services when we know that we're going to be getting money injected back in and we're going to need to re-up those programs? That disruption can cause actually greater financial and social stress. Whereas, because that affects primarily a lot of the vulnerable populations that are more general funded. Whereas the governor's thinking was, well, we can make those cuts and bite the bullet now so that when the funding comes, we can restart the program again, and we would have had a little bit of savings as well in the interim. We thought that that was going to be too much of a hardship, given what a lot of the more vulnerable populations that are very financially assistance dependent were already going through with this pandemic. So we thought it was more helpful to spend down a little bit of our budget reserves and make sure that the programs aren't defunded. Why don't I stop there? And why don't you come up with questions or whatever is a burning issue that you want to talk about? Not as if we don't have too many of those.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think Stan, did you unmute yourself?
Wait, hold on a second. What?
Go ahead, Stan.
No, I'm sorry. I unmuted. I was just, I don't know.
Did you want to say something? Okay. If there's anybody that would like to say something, you can raise your hand or you can ask the question in the chat box and I will ask it on your behalf. We don't have, we have about 20 people on right now, so it's not too many people to do that. So,
and by the way, please feel free to make it as informal as possible. And I can also tell you a little bit about, I realized I talked about the budget but didn't give a legislative update. I'm happy to talk about my legislative bills as well. And I'm sorry to cut you off, David. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just trying to give everyone some time also.
okay. So
Should I
is there,
my legislative bills?
yeah, sure. If somebody has a question, please raise your hand. Okay. We have a question.
Okay. Oops. Are you recognizing Leslie?
I'm recognizing
Who?
Leonard Petrus,
Okay.
and then I'll get you next, Leslie.
Okay.
You're still muted. I'm trying to unmute you.
The joys of Zooming.
I don't know why it's giving me this problem.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Hi. You can hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I'm on my husband's computer, so I'm Lisa Petrus, not Leonard. I had a couple questions about the bills that come through the state concerning, like, for instance, SB 1818 and the other ones that the neighbors are getting very worried about that would make for more density within R1 residential areas. It seems that the state government overrides the local government on it, and we don't seem to have any control over what's going on in terms of development in our own neighborhoods.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I was kind of touching on this issue earlier, obviously, when I started talking about the market rate housing as well as affordable component. And I think there's been I've been saying this now for the better part of the last about 3 to 4 years, because there's a general confusion sometimes, or just forgetting of the interdependence of the different housing components. So one is, we've just needed to develop more housing units, because that in itself is manipulating the costs of housing, right? The less you have, the less you're producing, the less of a supply you provide, then the higher the prices of the existing units go up over time. So the less you develop, you're artificially forcing the prices to go up. But that's only one way of looking at the issue. That's only looking at it from the production side. The other components are that what percentage of the housing is currently being occupied by single entities due to the transfer of housing stock about 12 years ago, 10 to 12 years ago, during the last economic downturn. And we haven't really, as there's been articles, there's been a lot of conversation about this, but there really hasn't been an inventory to say what percentage of the housing is currently occupied or controlled by a certain segment of the business industry that's also ensuring that the housing price stays at a certain level. So that's one. Two, you get into some of the major apartment building owners, and you look at some of the practices of what's happened in that arena and what are some of the changes necessary. And we started taking some steps with that. That also contributes to some extent. And then looking at how we landscape the future of places like LA as a region. So much of our housing bills have been driven up until now by more of the San Francisco and Bay Area models of thinking versus maintaining the integrity of property, individual property owners and communities in places like Los Angeles with its urban sprawls. Now, having said that, we're also still going to need to look at how places like San Fernando Valley are going to change over time. Since I've grown up in the Valley from the 80s up until now, I grew up in the West Valley in Winnetka, and it would take 15 minutes to traverse East-West Valley. You can't do that for less than 25 to 30 minutes now. And when you see that happen in someone's own individual lifetime, short period of a lifetime, that tells you how much more difficult and strained it's going to continue becoming. And so we need to make sure that we're taking steps, because when I started this conversation, I emphasized transportation. Transportation and housing are very much intertwined, and it's very critical that we provide the transportation programs necessary to help with housing outcomes. Sometimes people don't have to move if there is better transportation mechanisms put into place. But at the same time, we have to look at how housing can help complement some of those efforts too. One of the areas is that Van Nuys Boulevard is most likely going to be changing rapidly. You look at the stretch of Van Nuys Boulevard between Magnolia all the way to Roscoe, and you can't think of more than maybe 5 buildings that are over 2 stories. And when you look at the width of Van Nuys Boulevard and see how much opportunity there is for public transportation and the coexistence of business and potentially residential on top, there is a potential of quite a bit of growth. Now, when you add that there's the elements of the growth that is going to pit the new dwellers against the pocket existing dwellers. So foregoing those issues for a minute and looking at reasonable, sensible growth of housing in the area, I want to see more housing made available that is not just based on market rate. And a lot of the things that we're talking about in the legislature right now is continuous tax credits and benefits and incentives for developers, rather than looking at ways of what's the inventory of housing that we have now and where are the needs and how can we help meet the various needs so that we also have a very diversified population. And when I say diversified population is, you don't have your first responders all living in the outskirts of the region or the city. You look at Simi Valley and the population of LAPD officers in Simi Valley, and everyone knows about this. But if you provide certain incentives and help bring them back into LA City area, that's just one small example. But in order to make housing affordable for the price points of teachers and other government employees, that's going to take some doing to make sure that we provide the opportunities for them. So I'm trying to give you a very broad response for that and kind of touch on different areas. But I do believe that our housing policies have been very Bay Area centric, and that has needed to change. And you saw many of us, especially in the Valley, start taking a stand and saying, we're not going to support SB 55 or any other bill that helps expand housing to that extent, because we want to still have some local control. But at the same time, I also don't want to focus just on incentives and tax credits. I want to focus on what our housing policy is going to look like. What's the inventory of housing? How is it being used? But again, all of this is on the backdrop that when you look at LA County as a region, 70% of the property in LA County is single family residence. That's pretty overwhelming. And, there's no way you can build yourself out of that challenge. You need to make sure that you're also making certain modifications. Those modifications are what's going to become an important discussion point for us.
If I could answer to a couple of those points that you made, I agree 100% that it's affordable housing is, to me, the biggest issue in the San Fernando Valley. We're building very low income housing, but affordable housing for a teacher, say, makes $50,000 or $60,000 a year. They simply cannot afford to live in Sherman Oaks. And Sherman Oaks is 60% renters, 40% owners. Unfortunately, I think the biggest problem we have in the San Fernando Valley is we don't have any proper public transportation. A bus going down Ventura Boulevard every 15 minutes is not going to solve the problem. We need a subway through the valley. It's been going on for years. We've been talking about it, before I was born, they were talking about it. And I have a feeling they'll be talking it, long after I'm gone, and still won't be built. But, the biggest problem getting through the San Fernando Valley is traffic. And as far as housing goes, right now we have 500 new units just for 2 projects that are going to be going up in the next 2 years. There's a plethora of housing, expensive apartments, but there's nothing in the middle. And, and we're not building anything in the middle. So, the SB 1818, we have a project coming up. The neighbors don't want it, but there's 3 units of very, very low income housing. Again, still not helping the people who really, they're one step away from homelessness. A lot of people, they're spending half their rent money on rent every month. So how that looks, and I don't know how we fix that, but we really need affordable housing for working people, so they feel safe and that their kids can grow up in feeling safe.
Part of all of this is like water. You stop the flow in some direction and it's going to find its way. Gravity will help it find its way to another place, right? So on the housing front, for example, and especially about what you're talking about with SB 1818, one of the ways that I wanted to address that issue was in my first term of office, I introduced a bill, AB 2222, signed in 2014, that basically stopped exactly what you're talking about. Because what some developers would do is look at communities like Sherman Oaks, Studio City, Toluca Lake, and find underutilized properties that had maybe about a 10-unit apartment building on it, but it was sitting on a nice half-an-acre lot. And so when they were looking at how many more units they can develop, they can probably put 40 units and go up, 5 stories or whatever, 4 stories, and then do a bonus density program and get maybe 3 of the units low income, and enjoy 37 new market rate units, and only 3 affordable, very affordable, and then so a lot of properties were going out that way because in these communities, because it was also a place where people would want to come in and live and pay a premium rent value for living in those communities. So that bill, what it basically did was say, if you are going to take advantage of such a development, then you need to make sure to maintain the same number of affordable units that previously existed on that lot of land. So if it was a 10-unit rent control based the project apartment building, then the new project of 40 units is going to have 10 units rent control on top of the new affordable bonus density programs that the project took advantage of in the new development. So that way, making the developers rethink whether they want to make that investment or why they're making that investment. If it's a long-term growth strategy for them, then they would still go ahead with that investment. But if it's a very quick turnaround investment that then they're going to sell off and not even maintain ownership of, well, you kind of want to, it was my goal to try to move away from that so that the money isn't just made in the quick short run and not really think about the long-term consequences. So that bill has worked effectively. The problem is, first of all, a lot of developers jumped in and took out permits before the December 31st deadline of its implementation on January 1st, 1. 2, those that did not do that ended up using the Ellis Act to purchase, demolish, sit on for 5 years until they can get the new entitlements and not beholden to any of the previous requirements. So these are some of the challenges that we're still going to need to work through. And I'm sure some of the members in the chamber are probably not too happy that I'm saying this, but those of you that are also members of Sherman Oaks community probably can appreciate the balance between the two demands.
Assembly member, we have a question regarding unemployment insurance. A number of employees, they were unemployed and then they were back to work and now they're going to be out of work again. How difficult is it going to be to reapply for benefits, and how does the waiting period factor fit in? And I know this isn't under your jurisdiction specifically, but if you could update us on what the extra $600 that the federal government has been providing. That deadline is coming up July, at the end of this month. Are there plans to renew that? What's going on with unemployment insurance?
I can't speak to what the federal government is going to do, but I think, and I don't want to inject too much of politics here, but the reality is that it is an election year. And so I'd be hard pressed to believe that the federal government isn't going to continue some of the programs that it's implemented already. Now, even as a Democrat, relatively progressive Democrat who wants to see that people are getting the assistance that they need, I'm even concerned to what extent the federal government is printing money, because we're going to need to pay for all of this in the future years. And so when you're looking at a climbing budget deficit, a debt, national debt, not a deficit, but a national debt, that is going to significantly weaken the US dollar and create other challenges for us in the years to come that I'm very, very concerned about. because this is going to be impacting my kids' generation. This is not even about our generation anymore. This is going to have very long-term consequences for the next 2 generations with the way that we're spending money right now. So that's just a bit of a side commentary. As for the practical applications, my office, I think, has done a phenomenal job in trying to address people's needs. One of the things that I did very quickly in March, when we knew we were going to shut down, was told my staff, we had a staff meeting, and I basically said that from now on, everything is going to change. We're all taking on quite a few more constituent casework, and we're just going to need to be able to push ahead as quickly as we can and just make this entire office into a constituent outreach and service providing office, because none of the focus is going to be on legislation as much anymore. So I think just in the EDD department, we've had a little over 1,000 cases. I think we've resolved about 35%, roughly about 350 cases. We still have about over 700 cases open. And this is just, these numbers are just in our office. So you can imagine what's going on in other places. We have a very unique niche in our district with entertainment industry employees who have been suffering greatly. But at the same time, a lot of different regions in California have their unique niches also. So everyone has been feeling the pinch in one way or another. I just feel like when it comes to the entertainment industry, there's been a significant hardship among certain levels of employees that if EDD didn't come through quickly enough, it was not going to be recoverable. And we've probably had a lot of people having to leave at some point, leave the state at some point, and go back to the state they were originally from, or with their parents. When there are, I don't know about the federal government's extension, but I'm hard pressed to believe it won't extend. When it comes to EDD services or state provided services, if you're having a difficult time, obviously, I've always encouraged folks to reach out to my office, and I personally get involved in the cases myself at some points. I've been in regular communication with the Secretary of Labor so that we change the way we are doing things. I've at some points even jokingly said, I'm ready to offer my entire staff to be trained and to use the EDD software and computer system, so that when we're getting the calls in, you just cut us as middleman, and we just go ahead and have access to your data and see how we can, with the proper controls, address some of your need, go ahead and fix the issues. At least if we do that for our constituency, and every other of the 79 assembly offices are capable of doing that for their constituency, you're reducing the number, overwhelming numbers. Obviously, there's security challenges with that involved. So it's one of the biggest disasters and failures that this pandemic has also shown, that our state agencies were just not well equipped to be able to deal with a lot of these challenges. And it also comes back to a point where, if any of you follow this on LA Times and some other publications, many of us in this Zoom call remember COBOL and Fortran and some of those operating systems from the 80s. That's what the state is still using. That's still the delivery service programs that we have these major infrastructural services running through. And so we have to have a certain number of these program experts on hand, who are, by the way, all coming to an age of retirement soon, that are still familiar with the programs so that they can do the troubleshooting. For a state that is the birthplace of the technology that the rest of the world uses now, and we continue to innovate, it's pretty shocking where we are with our own government's systems. And during the good times are when we need to make the overhauling investments. And a lot of times we don't. We just witnessed the last 8 years. We debated and argued and didn't make the changes in enough time so that we could absorb some of these shocks that we're dealing with right now. So
just a quick follow-up. I've had some employees who have they've applied and they haven't been released or furloughed, but their hours have been reduced or their pay has been reduced. And there's not really a clear category for those people. The forms only ask you, are you, when was the last day that you worked? It doesn't say, has your pay been reduced? And I think it makes it difficult for people to properly classify what kind of assistance they're looking for, what kind of assistance is coming from the state. Are these underemployed employees, or are these underemployed or unemployed?
yeah.
And the distinction is being lost in this process.
And again, I'm happy to help in this circumstance. We can help elevate the issues as they come our way. That's something that it's been a constant struggle with EDD in trying to get their attention in making the changes. But part of the challenge also is that they've been drowning. And I'm not here to apologize on their behalf or to make excuses on their behalf, but they've just gone on hiring over 3,000 new employees from different state agencies. Not all new hires, obviously. A lot of them are transfers, temporary, in order to help meet the overwhelming demands, because we have almost 2 million claims that are still not addressed in the state alone. So, so some of the more nuanced, and I hate to categorize this as a nuance, but some of the more nuanced issues that you're bringing up right now, unfortunately, I think are going to just fall into the normal cycle until they're able to overcome the major bulk. Right now, our office is trying to still get issues addressed from March and April. We are just turning over a letter to them, unless if we already did yesterday, of about, I think, a little over 700 cases, of which a good percent, half of it is still left remaining from March, April. That's the severity of the challenge we have. And this is just one office. So you can imagine multiplying that to 80. And then keeping in mind that not everyone calls our offices, because most people don't even know about what their elected offices can do for them. And so, and we've been dealing with many individuals who have, I think there are people who have been working this process who have become better familiar than the very employees EDD hires and has right now. Because they've been so patiently and diligently working through that they're seeing it. They see how the left hand and the right hand don't work well. So I'm going to continue pushing and being the thorn on the side of EDD. We've already questioned them during the budget hearings quite a bit and provided them with the support and the financial resources that they need in order to address this issue, but they're still not meeting the standards that we've laid out for them.
I'm going to, Leslie Elkin has a question. I'm going to unmute, or she's unmuted. But before I say that, I just wanted to put in a positive plug for the Department of Motor Vehicles. I had to go last week to renew my license, and I have to say they had it together, and they have a great system set up, very clean, and how they check people in. I just putting in a positive plug. I went to the one Van Owen and Kester in your
Oh, good.
district.
Yeah, it
So that's a good plug for them, and they were in relatively good spirits despite everything going on. So with that said, Leslie, you have a question.
Okay, thank you. I am a lifelong resident. My husband actually went to Sherman Oaks Elementary. We raised our kids here. Our kids own homes in Sherman Oaks, and they're both landlords as well. And I am a commercial and residential landlord and a real estate agent, so I have a unique perspective. I think, well, two things. First of all, there's plenty of room on the boulevards rather than encroaching into single family homes if you're going to build. But I also think before you think about adding more building, which is kind of like a developer gift in disguise, what about a vacancy tax? I personally have approached so many landlords and said, I have a client who would be a perfect fit, but your rent is too high. Would you consider taking this? And I cannot tell you how many will say to me, I'd rather be vacant. I'd rather take nothing than take that kind of a cut. And I have never had a vacancy. It's 25 to 30 years we've owned the properties. Not one vacancy, because I just lower the rents. You know, if I see within a few weeks that I'm not getting the price I think it's worth, I lower the rent. That's it. I will never have a vacancy. I don't believe in it. I think it's greedy. I think it's ignorant. I know landlords that have vacancies for 5 years rather than lower their rent. If there was a vacancy tax, I think that would be a quick way to just force all of these landlords to just lower their rents. You don't need even rent control. You don't need the building. We have a ton of stuff that's sitting vacant, and that's both commercial and residential. And it would also cure a lot of the homeless issues that we're having, because like there's some landlords along Ventura Boulevard, they will not lower their rents, and they're just covered in homeless and defecation, everything else, where they could have, a nice clean business, but charge a lot less and be done with the vacancy. So, Adrin, what do you think of that?
I think in many ways we're actually paralleling what we said. If you heard me initially talk about housing and affordable housing, I was making the distinction between how we do need affordable housing, but we also need the affordability of housing, and that requires doing things to make sure that you're appropriately manipulating the economic outcomes, so that you're getting the housing into the marketplace and driving the price down, to keep it brief. But if you heard also what I said about taking an inventory of the number of housing units that are currently underutilized,
Yes.
That's a big component. That's a big piece of all of this. I think that plays into a certain percentage. Even if it's 8 or 9%, that can have a dramatic impact on the number of housing units that are either made available and or the per share cost and affordability of housing overall.
Right, without building.
I'm not
without building.
Right. No, I'm saying this, and again, I repeated a couple of times about how I think most of the bills are focused on incentives and tax breaks. I don't want us to focus on that. I want us to start focusing on how, I think tax credits and incentives are key and necessary, but it shouldn't all be about that. It should be also about what our inventory of housing looks like. To put a tax on vacancy lots, that's something that's being discussed, and it's something that is, I don't know if it's in bill form right now, but it's something that's been talked about actually for the better part of the last 2 years.
But not just lots, vacancy units, like vacancy apartments.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry,
Okay.
I used the wrong word.
Okay.
What I meant.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
No, because up until a couple of years ago, also there was quite a bit of foreign investment coming in of, you know, 500,000 or greater, you know, purchasing homes. And we saw how that has impacted LA, especially because that drove up the house, that contributed to driving up the housing costs. A lot of that money has been dried up over the course of the last year and a half or so. So you're even seeing some of those houses come back on market. So a vacancy tax proposal, I think, would be fitting, but I think it would be important to separate, first of all, the commercial from residential. I think commercial area is going to have its own challenges. I think this pandemic has shown that there's going to be quite a bit of changes coming in the commercial use area. So I think that the marketplace is going to have a greater influence on than anything I think need to do legislatively, because I think if we do something statewide, we might actually be hindering the process or kind of thwarting some of where the market pressures or pushes are taking that industry. On the residential side, though, I think I agree with you. I feel we need to assess something so that we're cutting options of that chokehold that there is on residential units.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think Norm agrees with me. Oh, you do? Okay.
No, I don't. I don't agree with you. I think the market will take care of it with the number of units that are being built in the San Fernando Valley, and you see them everywhere. There'll be an abundance of available units within the next year. It's starting now, and the market will settle down because the landlords will have to adjust their rents to the market rate. There are a lot of units being built now. You see,
I agree with that, but then when you do that, you're only talking about expanding the pie rather than looking at the different characteristics in the pie and seeing, well, why is 25% of the pie not functioning well? I mean, it's one thing to just continue expanding.
But it will function well if you let the market. I'm not for a legislative demand on landlords to lower their rent. Then you're going to have what you have in other parts of the country where there's a deterioration of the buildings and the upkeep because the landlords can't do that. Let the market take care of it. Thousands of units are going up in the valley. In Canoga Park, you've seen what's going on in Canoga Park. There's one complex of 1,000 units going up there. It's almost done.
Just a couple of blocks away from me, there's probably going to be about 2,500 units in the next 2 to 3 years. North Hollywood area is exploding.
Historically, it's supply and demand in action. This is a case study of supply and demand. The cost of housing will go down on its own because of the number of units.
No, I agree on the supply and demand.
I'm not for a legislative answer to this, but anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Assemblyman, we have a question from Dr. Miller.
Hi, Adrian. Thank you for taking the time to come talk to us today.
Of course.
Not only am I a member of the Sherman Oaks Chamber, but I'm head of the Acupuncture Association. So we have over 200 small businesses in your district and 13,000 small businesses in the state. And my question is regarding essential workers. Liquor stores and people who sell marijuana are considered essential workers. And with the governor's order, we're not real clear on where we fit. So when you call the acupuncture board, we are by law primary care providers with all other physicians. But the acupuncture board says that it's up to the city or the county or the state, and they recommend that we talk to someone on the state level to meet with the governor's office to get some clarity whether or not we can work. My specialty is cancer, virus, immune. And so I have patients who are on chemotherapy, seniors, and I don't want to stop those treatments, especially people who are in chronic pain and you're treating them for pain. And so if they're not able to see us, that's why the opioid stuff is going up. And the fact that you're on both the health committee and the long-term care committee gives you a little bit of a weight to draw some attention to get some clarity as to whether or not we can be considered essential. Now, most of the people I know don't really want to work, but there are some of us that do want to work. One of my specialties is virus, and so we're treating a lot of post-viral syndrome, and we're using a lot of the tools that they used in Taiwan and Korea and China to keep people from going from being positive to ending up in the emergency room. And so that data is getting compiled. But in the meantime, we have in your district over 200 small businesses that I spoke to last night, knowing that I was going to come talk to you today. They said, can you get some clarity? They don't know who to talk to. And the acupuncture board is getting hundreds of calls coming in. And I spoke to the acupuncture board and I let them know, and I let all the acupuncturists know that it's a gray area and it shouldn't be. It should be an easy, quick fix to say that we are as essential as people selling liquor and alcohol and marijuana.
I'm happy to talk to you about this further because this requires a few question and answer and back and forth. So Neil, if you want to talk about this after the meeting, I'm available.
Absolutely. I'm going to call Dan up north and talk to the scheduler and see if we could set something up. I know Dan for a long time.
Okay, good.
So I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll set something up and we can try to work something out. And I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for bringing it up.
Oh, great.
It is very strange who becomes classified as a essential worker and who is not, and the ambiguity involved with all of this. So I appreciate that concern, and I'm happy to help to the extent that I can.
Great, thank you.
We have a question regarding the general state of our police department. Is there any other way to reform the police system without defunding them? There's already way too few police cars on the streets now. Are we heading in the wrong direction in that regard?
It's a great question, and thanks to whoever brought it up. There's no question that all of us probably felt the same pit in the stomach when we saw what happened last month and for how long it happened. Well, my comment is primarily about the victims that some of the excessive police force over the many years has claimed, the lives of many individuals that's been claimed. I think there's a couple of things that haven't been considered well. LAPD itself is, I think, one of the finer institutions because we've been battle tested over many decades. I mean, you look at LAPD and where it got its start. It was a very corrupt department, going back to the 20s and 30s, and it's continuously changed over time.
Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R.
And Neil, if you don't mind putting yourself on mute. There you go. Thank you. And so sorry. This is a pretty big area, and it requires when the call for defunding was made, I think there was a lot of lack of understanding and awareness of what it really meant. I think a lot of people interpreted it the way they either heard it or saw it, or and I think it's become a very negative sentiment. I think there are elements of that conversation that are very important. When you look at where our police departments have gone over the last few decades, to what extent we are arming our police departments with heavy equipment that I don't really know if it's necessary, because there was a thinking that the more military style equipment we have, the more we will deter people from doing the wrong thing. Well, obviously that thinking hasn't really worked well, because we still have a lot of issues in high dense urban areas. So the fix should have been something different. You know, I do appreciate that LA City has been attempting to expand our number of police officers, and Antonio Villaraigosa Mayor Villaraigosa started this, worked on this for a while, and he got it to the magic number of 10,000, which there really wasn't it didn't really mean much of why 10,000. It could be 11,000. So a lot of things I feel like have been arbitrarily done, or the thinking of that time was adopted and then not checked again to see if it's working or not. So when it comes to defunding the police, obviously I don't want to see fewer police. If anything, I want to see more police officers. But at the same time, I don't think there needs to be an investment in some of the equipment and the programs that we've had up until now. I shouldn't say programs because that makes it a little too vague, but especially on the equipment front. And I think the police should be better trained in order to be able to address certain situations. We need to move towards a greater level of de-escalation. And LAPD has been at the forefront of this as well. The legislation that we passed at the state last year in police use of force, to some extent, it was modeled based on what LAPD was already doing. And I think that's partially because of the level of diversity that LAPD espouses, as well as how large of an institution it is, and how difficult it is to manage such a large institution. So the communication has to be very clear cut. So this is a very big topic area that I'm happy to engage in. I feel like there's misunderstandings though or miscommunication of what exactly defund means. I don't want to see LAPD be defunded. I think, but I also don't feel that Black Lives Matter's calls of defunding really meant to just negate police departments. I think that has become a point of division amongst people because of the lack of interpretation. I think it's important for us to have conversations to know exactly what that means, so that from that starting point, we can figure out how we move forward. Do we make the LAPD less of a paramilitary organization? I think that would be a good thing. There are uses of expenditures on equipments that we probably don't need to make. Sheriff's Department heavily invests in a lot of equipment that they probably can do without. But I think more of those dollars should actually go towards training and or hiring more personnel, and or maybe hiring less sworn officers, well, not less sworn officers. In addition to the sworn officers, hiring individuals who can help facilitate certain situations rather than sending a police officer. So there's different gradations in this. And I think that's a very valuable change to evolve all of the police departments too. But it's meaningless to say cutting down or disbanding police force or interpreting it to mean anything more than looking at how we evolve and change the police departments. And by the way, let's also not forget that the incident that propelled all of this was in a different state. The practices and the culture is very different. And when we hear about these brutal exchanges that happen, a lot of times it's in cultures or setting that's very different than LA. Again, I'm not saying LA hasn't had its bad share, but I think we've been at the forefront of having a lot of issues, and we've embittered our police department over the course of ever since the Watts riots. So it's somewhat unfair to put all of the law enforcement agencies in one bucket and say they all need to change the way they're doing it. I think LAPD has done a fine job, and I would pick an LAPD officer any day over most any other police officers. I mean, you look at per density capita. LAPD officers do the work of 4 officers in New York. If you were to compare and contrast, just given the numbers that we have and we're dealing with. So I know that doesn't answer the extent of how deep this question can get, but that's just the start.
Does anybody else have any questions? I want to make sure that I ask anybody who hasn't asked a question yet. Raise your hand if you want to say something. Okay. I have another question from Lisa.
Hi. So you just touched on one of the topics that people are discussing in terms of homelessness. Rather than sending out a police officer to a situation where there's homeless people, they would send out a trained person, to save the resources for sending a police officer. And I don't know what the state's position is, but I can tell you in Sherman Oaks, the homelessness is just exploding every day. And I think people used to care more about it. But I think now the neighbors are just getting fed up. They've had enough. And it's a crisis situation now. Something has to be done.
Yeah. It's all over the valley. It's all over LA. It's, I live by the intersections of Lancashire and Vineland. So you can imagine what it's like right here as well. It's all over the valley. And to some extent, I gotta say, it actually, I think, is a benefit to the issue that it's not hiding in downtown anymore, because for the last 40 years, it was just secluded in downtown. Now that it's before us and it's in our communities, the last 4 or 5 years, we've actually started taking steps towards addressing these issues. But for the first 40 years, homelessness is nothing new. We've had this for a very long time, and it was secluded in downtown, and not much was being done. But now that it's in the midst of our communities, there's been much more attention to this issue, and it's something that we're gonna need to continue investing in. But it's also something that we see that it's not just about housing. Housing is a critical part. It's also making sure that there's rehabilitation. There's ample guidance on substance abuse. There's a major investment in mental health that hasn't happened for a very long time. And this has been this is probably the biggest contributing component of this issue. So, and how do you fulfill all of those obligations and investments so that you can address the issue in a much more holistic way rather than just react to it the way we've been doing up until now. It has been, for the most part, very reactionary. Now, unfortunately, there's also been a lot of work done, but that gets eclipsed because of how daunting and large the demand is. But, to go back to your point of what you were saying also, it's in many occasions, you are going to need to send the police out with someone who's a service provider. You can't just send the service provider alone, because you don't know the mental state nor the circumstance of that individual who's homeless and what's going on at that time. So this is something that needs to be done through a partnership. It's not something that's going to be done either or. It's going to require police involvement in certain cases.
Thank you.
I think Fran had a question.
Fran, you have a question?
Hi. Changing the subject a little, can we go back to the governor and the mayor's orders regarding the pandemic? yesterday for a minute. I don't know if you have the answer to this, but some of it, one of the things said non-essential offices. What does that mean?
That's what I was trying to say before when I said some of these things are arbitrary. So I think without wanting to be too prescriptive, the governor has tried to say, stay home unless you really need to be at the site of your business. And that's been his gentle approach in trying to have people take personal responsibility and practice a little bit of their own personal discretion. Because when the future orders have to come in to shut down, I think it's going to be worse than the previous shutdown that we had. I think what ended up happening is in California is that we took the steps to shut down quickly, and it saved a lot of lives. Our hospitals didn't get overwhelmed. Believe it or not, we had a hospital in Northern California shut down because they weren't doing enough elective surgery, so they weren't making enough money. So they shut down, abdicating all other responsibility to the regional demands, because it's not just about elective surgeries, it's about providing a service to the region that you're located in, for especially in more rural areas where there are lesser and lesser numbers of hospitals requiring greater distances of driving until you get to a hospital. So because we didn't see the explosion of numbers the way New York saw them, I think we became a little too complacent and comfortable. And so the numbers are on the rise again, and these are the steps that are being taken. And I think he's trying to avoid being too prescriptive right now, because if he doesn't see the results in the numbers go down, then I think you're going to see a lot more prescriptive and stronger measures being taken, whether you agree with it or not. I mean, I have my own take on that, but that's what's going to happen.
Going back, if I can follow up for a second. So what's happening that I'm seeing is that the employer, maybe not being so virtuous, says, we're essential, you need to come in. And the employees are saying, we don't feel safe after this order. Yet, according to most things I've read, the employees really have no say in this, and they can be fired if they refuse to go in. So it seems like the employees are caught between a rock and a hard place here, and with nothing to back them up.
It's a very valid point. I don't have an answer for you on that. Unless if you just wanted to say that so that I'm aware of it. I mean, I think Leslie was just asking a question about the restaurants, and I didn't see the entirety of the question because it just popped up. But you look at restaurants, and so what are you going to do? Put in an order that says, restaurants that have an outdoor component can stay open, and those that made major heavy renovations and investments, but they have no outdoor capability, are going to shut down. I see the inherent discrepancy in all of that. And I feel for the businesses that have made that major investment. That's why I think I don't want to be too critical of the governor, because I think he's dealing with something that nobody else in this generation or two has dealt with. So it's a little difficult to do things without having a playbook made available to you to know how to address issues of this significance and of this impact. But I think one major mistake that was made was you had this governor being bold enough when the federal government was enacting to shut down the economy of his state. That was a pretty big decision. And I think it was accepted well initially. I think where the mistake was made was him not discussing timelines and benchmarks. This is when I'm going to open it. This is what I'm looking at. These are the things that I'm considering. If these factors are met, then the first step is going to be taken, and I want the first step to be by end of April, or it's subject to change, but mid-May. And if I think some of those assertions were made and benchmarks were established, everyone would have known targets that they need to keep and how they become discretionary of their conduct. And I think as a society overall, we would have advanced probably better than where we came to now. I think some of that communication didn't happen. And because of that, there was a growing frustration. And it led to people starting to take their own viewpoints as facts and start acting out based on their viewpoints, rather than what was going on with healthcare related factors.
If I could,
I'm sorry, I don't have a clear-cut answer for you, Fran. It's a hard question. I mean, we're learning about some of this. Part of the challenge also is, don't forget, this virus, we don't even know enough about this virus. Forget the fact that we don't have a vaccine. We're still learning about the impacts of this virus. We're still learning about how, after autopsies, we're finding that if it wasn't going to be the virus and the immune system killing the person, it was going to be the blood clots in the different organs. And we're still learning so much about this, or now we're seeing neurodegenerative issues among survivors of the virus. So what's really scary about this virus is just not knowing enough about it and not knowing how to address it. We're still having issues with whether it's the delineation of whether it's airborne or it's a droplet. And a lot of folks have a tough time with the concept of the aerosol effect. Don't be in the same place for a very long time, beyond a certain amount of time, especially if there isn't air being circulated, even if you have a mask on. So I'll stop, but that's what's very frightening about this. And the fact that it's not being communicated well, I think that's contributed to this, to the exasperation of the issue.
well, it's not only that it wasn't communicated well. I mean, at one point, the governor did lay out what he called his roadmap to recovery. We included it in our newsletter. It was a full PowerPoint. It had benchmarks. It had all those things. The problem, along with what 40 other states have done, was that every state ignored their own standards.
Mm-hmm.
Every single state, including ours. And the governor took a chance in closing the economy, but he reopened it just as quickly, and that shouldn't have been the case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the same way that the president is pressuring schools to reopen, I feel like the governor's premature announcement to reopen businesses forced a lot of businesses to reopen when they weren't ready. And it also put us in the position we're in now. And it's really frustrating and confusing to me that we went from this roadmap to recovery, and then almost within like a 24 to 48 hour, I was literally on the phone with the general manager for the Fashion Square, and as we were on the phone, he says, "Oh wait, I'm getting this, notice. Apparently, we can open tomorrow. I need to let all my tenants know." And he was running to take care of stuff. But it's like that kind of knee-jerk decision-making. And I was also frustrated with the LA County Health Department and how quickly they followed the suit of the governor when they should have pumped the brakes. I mean, within like 10 minutes of the governor announcing, the county announced. And I just, from a health perspective, and I was really impressed with how the governor was handling this until that point, until he handed that order down the way that he did it, and without a lot of direction and completely disregarding the standards that we had set. We did have standards and benchmarks, and we ignored them.
We did, but it wasn't as talked about as it wasn't as widely talked about and discussed and absorbed the way everyone started washing their hands, keeping 6 feet of separation, and wearing masks. You know, we were great at repeating the very basic, essential things very quickly, but then we didn't continue emphasizing on, well, here on out, this is what it's going to look like. And these are the realities. And in order to overcome this challenge, these are the steps that we need to take, and continuously push that as well. I don't think we did that well. I think we kept the focus too much on just one area and didn't progress enough about all the other things that we need to be doing.
Other questions? We have just 10 more minutes. Lisa, do you have a question?
Yeah,
You muted yourself.
And Johnny has a hand up as well.
I'll
Okay,
make it.
Johnny,
I'll
you're
make
next.
it quick. My husband's a physician, and the hospital he works in are adding more beds to the ICU to get ready. They think that this round is going to be much worse than the first round because
Right.
people aren't taking it seriously, and they're very, very worried.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I agree. I think it's going to be, again, I think what happened was we didn't see the effects of New York, and we were using the standard of New York. At the leadership level, we were using it as the standard of what we don't want to become. So it's a success not getting there. We achieved that. But then because we achieved it, I think for the most part, we lost sight of, well, you know, this really isn't that bad. It's a simple flu, it seems like. It's a bug. We can overcome it. And it's almost as if that thinking took over. Unfortunately, I think we're going to be hit much harder than we anticipated now. And the second round is going to be worse. And I think in most places around the state, in most hospitals, the ICU numbers are on par to where the highest number of ICU acceptances intakes were back in April, or higher. I know that Kaiser is struggling with that in some of its sites, and Kaiser is a good indicator of this because of the number of hospitals that they have and the averages that they can provide. So I very much am concerned about how bad the next hit is going to be. And by the way, going back to the comment of how little we know about this virus, some of the assumptions back in March and April were that by the time of summer and the heat was going to help us get rid of a lot of the public space viral contamination. That didn't really come out to be the case, and we're seeing spikes right now. And primarily it's because of gatherings, and it's because of close proximity of people congregating. So,
Ronnie, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm trying to look into the legalities of the executive order. What I'm reading is that indoor operations are now outlawed, and I own a hair salon, small business, and I'm wondering if I can do hair outside. I mean, I did speak with one of my lawyers, and they said, you know, as far as what I'm reading here, you could cut some hair outside. What's your take on that?
It's the ingenuity at work. I can't give you an answer on the fly, but I don't see a problem of why you couldn't do that. Right. I'm not the authority on that, so I'm happy to look into it and get back in touch with you, Johnny.
Yeah, I mean, our industry has been devastated. We've been open for about 4 weeks, and you know, people are just starting to get their feet on the ground, and now they're swept out from under us again. And cutting hair outside is, you know, only gonna put a dent into, you know, what I need to do for my business and my family. but what am I going to do? Am I going to, how do I answer these clients? How do I service the people? How do I provide for my family? And yeah, I'd really like to know. And there's a lot of hairdressers. I know a couple like mobile barbershops that have been working outside already, and they plan to continue. And I definitely have some space behind my shop where I could set up and at least just get the day-to-day haircuts done. But I don't know if that's legal. I don't know if I can tell that to my clients or my hairdressers here at the salon, if we can pull off any of that. But I'm considering it, but I don't think we're going to get a firm answer. What do you think?
Well, first of all, let me, and I don't want to delve too much into details, but since this is something I hadn't thought about, but it's a legitimate issue. Yeah. How would that change the experience of your clients? Would they still come to you if you were going to do it outside?
A small percentage would, maybe if I had to guess, about 25% of them would be, the demand would be so high for them that they felt like they need to get touched up. We're dealing with personal hygiene of a lot of people,
right.
How they feel when they go to work. It's a little different than I think a lot of the government perceives it as a luxury or something along those lines. But the main thing for me is the alternative is going around and doing house calls and going into people's houses where I'm not in control of the sanitization,
right.
But I am in control in my salon. It's the safest place that I feel I can work. And the same goes for, if I were to have to set up outside, at least I know I can have a controlled environment where I kids aren't running around, dogs aren't running around, old food ain't laying around, which is the case sometimes if you go into somebody's house. So, just being able to provide a safe place for myself instead of having to, go to multiple people's houses a day and get gas and coffee along the way. That just seems like such a dangerous prospect. Whereas setting up shop in one place that I can clean all the time seems like the safest way if I'm going to work at all.
Well, and whether it's your employees or independent contractors, you don't have control over what they would do, because if they choose to not participate, then you're in a very difficult situation.
Yeah. And do you have any word on? I read a little bit of something about enhanced enforcement of new guidelines and restrictions. I mean, personally, as a hair salon, in my opening month or whatever, I saw nothing. Nobody came by. Nobody did anything. Is there going to be any enforcement, or what type of enforcement are they going to have? I think you're going to have a problem moving forward.
Big problem
right now. Yeah. Not just with hair salons, but just about with every business. So what do they got in store?
So I think part of the biggest challenge is the enforcement.
Yep.
And you're not going to be able to have the capacity to go and check every one of these locations. So what you do is you set parameters for the lowest common denominator. And that's why you're paying a high price now. You're paying a high price because somebody else in another county wasn't willing to do all the things that you are putting into place. That's why I think there's a little bit of an inequity in how all counties then fall under, unfortunately, the same guideline or parameter. But at the same time, it's become a very well-known example of how two COVID positive hair salon employees had hundreds of clients, and yet no one ever got infected because they were keeping their masks. And it was a air circulated operation, and all the other factors were in compliance, and so it was working. So I don't see how. I'm happy to work with you on it in short, quick response to figure out what we can do to address your concern. I think it's very innovative to do the haircutting outside, to do the work outside. I'm also, but again, as you said, that only addresses a small percentage of your work. I think your clients are still going to be feeling the impact. And then what ends up happening is you're paying the price of some counties that may not be doing the enforcement on par with where LA would be performing. So you're going to have people going to other counties or other places and taking their business there. And I think part of the reason why LA wanted to open up so quickly its restaurants was because it was seeing to what extent LA residents were going to all the way to Santa Barbara or other places.
Wow.
And so that they would have a dining experience. And obviously that's not everyone, but of the group of individuals that can afford to do that, to spend that time on driving and that experience, well, those are also retail tax dollars that are going elsewhere rather than LA, which has a devastating impact for next year. So all of this also is very important because of how, when you're impacted, the city is going to be impacted next year, and it's going to have to cut its services even more.
Right.
So I'm happy to work with you on it, Johnny. If you want to, my office number is 818-376-4246. The numbers get routed to my staff, and they will put you directly in touch with me, or you can feel free to email me at adrin.nazarian@asm.ca.gov. That's my direct work email, and David can send that out as well. In fact, I should probably just put it down on my...
Thank you. I don't know if you guys have looked at Main Street in Santa Monica, but they did a beautiful job at really opening up the sidewalk. They closed off the first lane of the street. They got they got all the restaurants with their tables outside. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. It looks like Disneyland or something like that. What are the chances that, Sherman Oaks does something like that? Santa Monica's got
that's a question
incorporated city, right? So they can do what they want.
No. That's a question for your council member. I was laughing because I just I don't know what the appetite of investment would be right now by anyone, given the uncertainty of what's going on. But that's a question for the council office, and to figure out aesthetically what you can transform the area to. I'd be happy to give you my take on it, but that's not my jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly member, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with the Sherman Oaks Chamber today. We, continue to have an open invitation to you to address our members, at any time on issues of importance on your agenda, but also to just remain in contact with us about what's happening in Sacramento. And I want to thank everybody for joining us for our conversation with Assembly Member Nazarian. And until next time, have a safe and good afternoon.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
By the way, I already have a call scheduled with Neil at 12:45, which I'm assuming is in a few minutes. So ask and you shall receive. All right. Take care, folks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.